All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today as we celebrate Tony's new book, Where It Will. This is, I hope you've got your copy ordered or in your hands already. If you haven't, get it in your hands as quickly as you can. It is just a beautiful, moving collection. It's such a personal stories in here that just are going to sit with you for quite a while. And Gnashing Teeth Publishing is just honored to have this collection. And we will be submitting it for lots of awards. So let's we have we're very excited about this book. And I couldn't have asked for a better person to work with than Tony. There were a couple at the very end, a couple of poems that I had the pleasure of sitting with Tony on the phone and being able to watch him as he worked through a couple of little poems and just watching how much craft he put into the work. And it really shows throughout the entire collection of what detail he puts into every single word in these poems. They're just beautiful. And Tony, thank you so much for trusting us with this. So as people still keep coming into the room, we're going to go ahead and have Susan K. Anderson read a little bit to get us warmed up today. Susan wrote a beautiful blurb for the book and has graciously agreed. Tony, I guess, bribed her to come on today and
Yes, okay.
spend time with us. And Susan also has beautiful poetry. If you don't know her, check her out. Susan K. Anderson lives in Southwest Oregon's Umpqua. I should have asked how to pronounce that. Umpqua River Basin. She's a reviews editor for Harbor Review and reads poetry submissions for Lily Poetry Review and Quarterly West. Her poems are in recent issues of Bulb Culture Collective, Heron Tree, and Tiny Wren. Her poetry book, Mezzanine, features her work as a graveyard shift custodian at a university. While growing up, her family lived in Nome, Alaska, and on Indian reservations in Nevada and Montana. Anderson is a National Poetry Series finalist and won a Jovanovich Award. Anderson interviewed Virginia Brodigan, asked, "This project and its resulting memoir, Please Plant This Book Coast to Coast, as well as her book of poems, Mezzanine, are now available." And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen and Gnashing Teeth Publishing. It's so great to share a little time with you and listen to poems. And congratulations so much, Tony, Botti, for your beautiful, beautiful book. I don't know if people have ordered this. It's a wonderful cover, of course, that catches the eye and beautiful poems within. So thank you so much for inviting me to read a little today. I'll read from Mezzanine, which also has a red red cover. And this cover was from a photo that I took of a fire extinguisher cover where I cleaned inside a building at night. So I was doing that, right before the pandemic started. I quit that job. I almost had 5 years there, but didn't. So I'm going to read you a few things from Mezzanine. Dreams continued. We loved the town, but could not find it from underneath all the fur. Seal, reindeer, fox, wolverine, bear. The town was said to be 2 blocks away, past the liquor store and just by the lockers. I knew where it was by heart. I found it in those spaces between buildings, too narrow for anyone or anything else but splinters of lumber and tar paper scraps. I saw the miners going about their business, the standing around part. Summers, I found it under the boardwalk where miners lost their nuggets, their dust. The town briefly visited during parades, Those were over too soon. Marching, dominating Maine. Kids tolerating the wait, dressed as pioneers and Okies. Kids planning their own future killings, in line for free ice cream. So patient. About the sky, larger than the land, if that seems possible. Anything could be dry music. Boats, nets, baskets catching. Sailors wait now at the lone shore, their castings quiet, looking down into the tomb, gaze across the water. The butterfly's song. 1. View from inside. This body had windows looking out over innocent lawns, old grass, an amazing pasture for large personality. Time stood still there. Recall a large triangle seen dangling from the back of my chuck wagon, ringing out across the country. 2. Butterfly song. Flower told me to say, so I said it, and nothing can be taken back. Now, so live your marathon life and tell me what it is like at the finish. If it is cool and green, as the others said along the way, because they passed that on, and I believed them. But now, just between us two, is there something else they were describing? 3. What was said? To the flower, or I mean about the flower, I thought was meant for me, wanted it to be. Now it seems it maybe was my mistake, reading into things too much as I tend to do in the wilderness, or at least close where the signage says, you are here. 4. Wonder how in the world this could stand so clearly, the mountains smoldering again, but in different places, wildflowers, what the butterfly sang of long ago. 5. Booked. It never got that far, not by far. Not much said. That is my point. It was there, but it did not occur. Case closed, question mark. With the bear. 6. Mistress. The bear breathed down my neck, embracing me. I could not remember anything more intimate. Would the bear change his life for me? Highly doubtful. Would mine be different? Highly probable. Everything is changing, everything set in motion. 7. Farms. Now in the strange valley. I know some have died for less. See this nest? Only sticks and grasses, plus mud, looking so hastily constructed. Where I land, near the chinchilla farms. 8. Alive. I made it in and out of there alive. I turned into a noodle, a stranger. How could I say thank you and not even please in the face of this most recent transformation? Piling on so much makeup. 9. Bare awareness. I became aware of bells tinkling, moon thought intruding. Even the clouds didn't seem the same clouds as before. But now the funny part. Whatever happened was going to unfold. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was just gorgeous. And I'm sure they can buy your book everywhere, Amazon, through you. All right. All right, guys. It is time for Tony to read a little bit. Anthony Botti grew up in Western PA and holds a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. His poetry has appeared in the Comstock Review, the MacGuffin, Cider Press Review, Flint Hills Review, and Mudfish. Over the last 25 years, he has worked in behavioral health administration, serving students, staff, and faculty at Harvard University Health Services. He divides his time between Boston and the Berkshires with his partner and their pug, Puck. Thank you, Tony. It's all you.
Thank you, Karen, so much. I want to thank Gnashing Teeth Publishing for this amazing opportunity. It was so wonderful when I got the phone call from and the email from Karen, who wanted to publish the book. I was just deeply grateful and actually quite surprised. But I really want to also do a shout out of thanks for Karen for her help in editing some of the poems and reordering some of the collection as well. I thought she had incredible insight in editing, and so I want to thank her. A special thanks to her design director, Andrew Hilliard, who helped me with the design of the book cover, who was amazing to work with. I think I drove him crazy and mad with all the details that I wanted to fix and to insert, but he was incredibly patient, and he produced an amazingly beautiful cover. I'm deeply grateful for that too. A big shout out to a new friend, Susan K. Anderson, whose poetry I read quite extensively online after she blurbed my book. And I wanted to make sure that she was part of this celebration. I want to just do a shout out. I love that poem, Butterfly Song. It's just absolutely stunning. Especially that first couple stanzas just blew me away. Thank you so much. And lastly, I want to thank everyone who came actually today. This is like midday, it's in the afternoon, and you have many other things to do. And I really just appreciate your coming to celebrate the launch of the book, and I'm deeply grateful. I want to start off with talking a little bit about how I came about doing this book. And I mean, I talked a lot about this with Karen, but I never expected to write a book. For me, writing poetry was always a very private, insular experience. I never shared my poems except for with my partner. I was totally content publishing in literary journals that no one would read except for esoteric poets. So I wasn't ever really planning to write a book, but because these were private exercises, exploring periods of my life over the last 30 years in notebooks. You know, I have a notebook for every year, and they were a form of therapy, analyzing what was underneath an experience for me. And so it was like a diary in some ways, these books. But about 2 years ago, I read a book called In Love by Amy Bloom, a beautiful book. It was a portrait of a marriage. And I thought to myself, why aren't there stories of gay men, as a portrait of a man and a wife, a man and a woman? And I thought, why aren't there stories of gay men who have lived for long periods of time together through the entire course of gay liberation, you know, in this country, through the AIDS epidemic, through the gay marriage debate, et cetera. And I thought, there aren't that. You know, and I read extensively in poetry and memoir, and I've never come across that. And I thought, that is a theme that really ran through a lot of my poems. And I thought, this is something I could pull together a book on. And that's how this book came about. Many of the poems were written over a course of 30 years. A third of the book was written in a kind of frenzied 9-month period of my life, when I knew I wanted to write the book. And a third of those poems were written in the 9 months before I started sending out to contests. So some of the book is very old, of course, recrafted and re-edited over time when I was producing the book, but a lot of the poems are actually quite new. So what's the book about? The book is a collection of poems that kind of dissect the complexity of relationships with my partner, with my parents, with my friends, the kind of tension and the disconnection, but also the attraction you have in those years, and the love and the loss of them at the same time. I was interested in exploring in the book memory, because I knew I couldn't write a portrait or a sketch of this long-term 30-year gay relationship without analyzing my own queer identity throughout the collection. So I did incorporate poems about my childhood through the AIDS crisis, and in that trying to find a voice. And so what I was interested in exploring was how what memories are stored, why are they stored, and then ultimately looking at how you discover yourself again in memory. So you're always discovering yourself, rediscovering yourself in those memory poems. But I think ultimately this collection holds stories of love, romantic, familial, but also really, really a love of nature too. And how love stands at the crossroads of holding on and letting go. And in those between spaces of holding on and letting go of love is where you finally discover who you are, with each other, and with the people you've loved and lost in your life. So that's really what the collection's about. I'm going to read some poems that kind of highlight some of those themes. The first one is called August Heat. It's the first poem of the collection. It's also the last poem I wrote for the collection too. I took notes 20 years ago. I went back to those notes 20 years ago and recrafted a poem from those notes. And I realized it really captured all the themes of the book. And so I wanted to put it first. There's an image of a garden in this poem, and that image of the garden runs throughout the collection, and weaves itself in and out as metaphor. So August Heat. What I want is never simple. It's August, the garden is moaning. I know I'm at fault, pruning these roses in second bloom that knows what is coming. A short lifespan, like happiness. When we first met in Cambridge, I expected you to dig up my loneliness, carried deep inside me. On my knees in this border bed, I hold out a clump of dirt, like a few useless words of apology, to persuade you to come back out in the moist air, to roll over for you like the farmer's cat on its back in the high grasses. When will I stop asking you to diagram a way out of my sadness? Yes, we've traveled all of Italy for 2 months. You taught me to make the perfect dry martini, how to split a cord of wood. Again this afternoon, I failed at sight reading your affection in the yard, your signals of solace. The glare in the August sun sends a false impression. The rose's deep red color, a perfect disguise, until I turn around to see the petals falling to earth. I ask too much, like how I dare these blossoms not to wilt in the afternoon heat. Their hooded gaze, never looking away from what approaches. The second poem continues the theme of the metaphor of the garden, and the natural world is throughout a lot of these poems. It's a partnership with me oftentimes in the poetry. And I use the image of the garden in spring as a way to find my voice after a long winter. This poem's called Overwinter. Underneath it is Ash Wednesday. It was written on Ash Wednesday. Overwinter. I expect disaster when opening up the cabin after a long period away. Burst pipes, dead mice, fallen trees. Seldom am I ready after the raw silence under the high snow on the first balmy day in the Berkshires. With no winter to hide in, I shed my thick coat like skin. In the yard given over to a sudden thaw, the dog noses around green sprouts that emerge from the clotted mud. Never imagined anything to have survived in the garden this spring. How do I attempt to live out the Lenten season? I'm learning to clear myself as I clear out these beds. A new muscle stretches in the rising temperature. A shrivel of red leaf squeezes its way up through loam, stem by stem, unfolding a whole mystery. As April heals, drinking in the sun, shy fern fronds smash through cold nights, craving what the earth makes poised to shoot up in its own time, to speak. The next poem is a love poem. It goes back 20 years. It looks back 20 years. And it's actually one of my favorites in the collection, actually. That first summer. After the tide swept away the broken shells, we soaked in the constant sun on our backs, living like nomads day to day, each day through. That first summer, we wanted nothing more from each other, just this. The picture we drew in the sand, signed our names to, washed away by noon. You inched closer to me on the plaid quilt, traded our salt lips. Afterwards, you fell asleep open-mouthed. By the time the sun slung low, your long legs danced in the surf. I stood waist deep in the ocean, the waves drowning out my words to you, an hour before we had to board the last train home to Boston. That was more than 20 years ago at Manchester by the Sea. I had not yet done things that would need forgiving. This next poem is a poem about my dad and me in many ways. The poem shows the strong hold and influence my father had on me since childhood, and how everything about that relationship seeps in all of my own relationships with I think my partner and my family and also my friends. It was a deep connection, complicated one as all parent-child relationships are, but a deep connection. This is called First Bike. Out on the back porch, my father has, I'm gonna start over, sorry. Out on the back porch, my father has fallen asleep before noon, his prayer book dangling open over the worn arm of the rocking chair. The rattle of his half-breath exhales after years without many wishes granted to him. In a pool of light, my gaze is pinned on his younger profile against the Pennsylvania sky, staring out at childhood. I look past the waves of clouds and flash back to skinny legs pumping my new purple bicycle, this time without training wheels, as I wobble down the gray sidewalk to the winding road ahead, leaning against his right hip. If I pedal fast enough, his sadness will not catch up to me, his firm hand still holding the rim of the bike seat. He hangs on like a heavy shadow, his cigar breath on my tan skin. Laughing, I try to pull ahead. Tucked under my tongue, I shout, let go, let go. This next poem doesn't really need an introduction, but it's all about, it kind of is nestled into this collection as trying to understand my queer identity and relationship, I think, to my partner and how I evolved, you know. It's called Photograph in Changing Light. A bleached out photograph preserved by accident between the pages of a book jogs my memory this morning, fastening me to my youth. I was not looking at the camera when someone snapped that picture. I stared off to the side, gazing at aunts who sipped coffee, made jibes about not showing up for the holiday meal. I tell myself old photographs are supposed to be silent. Why then am I stirred up by how I trembled that Easter, wounds I never speak aloud? That winter there were bullies, a new one and a few from the year before, tormenting me for the entire school year. I'm gonna kill you, queer. After classes, I hid in Agatha Christie mysteries in dark stacks of the school library. I took their shoves, their punches. I drew bullies to me, not because I wouldn't fight, but because they knew I wouldn't report them. Photographs are so-called anchors of the objective past, but are unstable as everything else. Tilting this Polaroid under my lampshade, I reassemble the parts of my 11-year-old self. By middle school, I had learned pain hurts less when you expect it at the lunchroom hour. Ahab's crew, just to give you some context, a lot of people know this because a lot of my friends are here. But I grew up in a boys' boarding school because my father was a teacher there. And this poem is actually in some ways a tribute to a favorite teacher of mine who was named Dr. Rockwell Gray. And for those who might know, he was the brother of Spalding Gray, the great playwright and monologuist. He was a favorite teacher. He was really my first poetry mentor. But this poem is really, again, about queer identity as it emerges through literature, actually, and through the book of course, Moby Dick. Ahab's Crew, boarding school, 1980. October flares in Western PA. In rumpled uniforms, boys mock each other around the oak table. Two chairs lean daringly on back legs. The schoolmaster shows up late on black mornings, beret tipped wide on his high forehead, tweed jacket dangling from his hunched shoulders. Twice he clears his throat, a voice more trusted than their own father's, before reading out loud from Moby Dick. Thin smoke rises from the hot ember at his fingertips. Half listening, they slouch with their hair curling round their heads, looking up at his moving lips, pausing to hear how the sailor's long arms swim deep through Pequod's barrel of spermaceti. Oily fingers hunt for their shipmates' hands to hold on deck in the light of day. By evening, the housemaster, barefoot in the common room, calls lights out. Sleepless on slim beds, hungry hands in the dark hit on eager skin under crisp white sheets. Never again would they drop into their bodies with the same aching. The next poem is, just for context, I worked in AIDS for 10 years. Both my partner and I worked together in the late 80s and early 90s, actually almost up to 1998. So we worked in AIDS, and this is a portrait of a friend. Many men of that period who had full-blown AIDS, once they disclosed their diagnosis, it was often kind of a death nail to their new partnership. And so this is a portrait of a friend with AIDS in 1992, and it's called Cherry Blossoms, Cambridge. The last memory I have of you is standing on Putnam Avenue under trees in late April. A cluster of flaring blossoms shouted out to your lover stepping away. Come back, come back. You bent a branch down to your face, leaning up against the rough bark and the wrinkled light. I heard you mutter under your breath, go anywhere I cannot follow you. Later that day, A spring storm brought down a dark afternoon. Soft buds smacked to the ground under a sky torn by clouds. On Thursday, you called to tell me how the next day in the shy sun, you scooped up the pink casualties off the brick sidewalk, rubbing their tight fists in your palm. Once your diagnosis was let out, you knew nothing could be brought back. After the blowing rain ripped through the trees, before the modest shoots had even time to break open. The next poem again is about my dad. It was maybe several months after his death. Sunday phone call. All last night, I held conversations with you. You stubbed out your cigar, striding barefoot into my dream, and went on sparring with me, though your last month in the hospital was silent. How do I make this a normal Sunday evening? Make a plate of spaghetti, walk up the dirt road with the dog, rent a foreign film. Instead, I down Jameson neat by the wood stove. When the phone rings in the kitchen, I forget that it can't be you. Remember Christmas Eve of '68 when you drilled me to repeat our new telephone number over and over in the passenger seat, just in case I got lost among the holiday crowds at Gimbel's department store? Sleep, I hear your voice young again, rallying fast tennis balls at me across the hot clay court. Outside geese over the house call in distress, the unbroken dark pressing around me. It feels like snow. The call tonight is my sister letting me know that your tombstone cannot be placed until the earth settles. This poem is about my mother. And all I can say about it is if you grew up in an Italian family in the 70s, you knew that cleaning was really an important part of the household. This poem is called Housekeeping. I never saw my mother in a bathing suit like other wives on the campus of the boarding school where our fathers taught. The summer of '76 stuck to our tan skin in the boredom of long, humid days in Pennsylvania. The radio reported record heat waves that year. On Saturdays, we were trapped inside until the house was redd up, a command in her Pittsburghese to clean up. She knelt down by our side on hardwood floors, a bucket of Murphy oil soap at her hip. Row upon row of washed out photographs of our ancestors in the hills of San Martino peered down from the mantel. Yet this was the hour when other faculty kids began to scent the chlorine in the campus pool. Other than swimming the small coal mining town down the mountain across the Kiscomenitis River offered little distraction. Led by her quick hands around the house, we scrubbed the bathroom tub with Clorox, vacuumed rugs, wiped clean the bottom of kitchen drawers. By late August, the noon heat clutched the wilting wallpaper. I'd grumble, is Nana coming to stay for the week? In silence, she would just work alongside me, mopping the steep stairs, smiling consent. In the bedrooms, my older sisters lip-synced Diana Ross's Ain't No Mountain High Enough on the hi-fi, squabbled over whether Patty Hearst was faking Stockholm Syndrome. Downstairs, my brother wisecracked about the neighbor's slutty daughter. All this banter in the house was like music to her. Only years later did we find out that she did not know how to swim. At the time, what we could not know was how her Saturday cleaning ritual held us in place next to her, wavering in the heat where no one could sink to the bottom of the deep end of the pool. How am I doing with time? Okay, yeah, okay, this is good. Solitaire. In my family, we love to play cards because my mother was a big card player. And so this is kind of a poem, a lesson from her, actually, in many ways. Solitaire. I finish what is left in the whiskey bottle. Sit down to solitaire at the kitchen table set for one, always with a single deck, just how my mother taught me when I was 10. I like how the game is played by oneself, the way cards are laid out from the start, some in rows, some in columns, mixing reds and blacks. Minor blemishes on the Queen of Hearts, a light thumb mark on the 5 of Spades, a trace of tiny bits of food on the Jack of Diamonds. I wait for the right suit, each card flipping over, no matches falling into place. I've come to accept what is put before me, pitted against myself. A lot of this book are poems about my partner and me over a 30-year period. Some are about tension, some are about disconnection. Others are about a poem at the end that I'll read is really a poem about deep love. This poem is about kind of a disconnection after a period of separation with his traveling after, in Belgium for 3 weeks. It's called The Rift, after John's return from Antwerp. You have come to the landscape of winter, passing by what is left by the ravens, a dead squirrel's coat, thick for the December chill. From the old dirt road, I look for you in the early morning, when you are out alone on the farm. By the red barn, a Belgian workhorse, head bowed, travels the fence line to you, its mouth opening at the sight of a hand, your outstretched palm ready to feed it carrots. This lame horse stands there like a blessing, not questioning your silence, however long. The mare's nostrils open, her soft nose rubs up your arm, nuzzling away your fear, this brief time when nothing is asked of you in the deserted field. In the unhurried sun, you come to learn you burn like stars, even in full daylight. I see on your face what I too am thinking, what you are remembering of the rift inside our silence. What you give me must be enough, I tell myself. Untangling the horse's matted mane, you're back with a cold knowledge that everything is just as we left it. By the broken down tractor, you stood a long time in the freezing wind. This next poem is a persona poem. I'll read a little piece of scripture that's right underneath the title of the poem. There's a lot of biblical references in the book, and it kind of reflects my divinity school background. But this is a poem I hadn't really, and I actually believe this, it was a privilege of watching a lot of people, both mostly women, mothers, daughters, sisters, who took care of these men who were dying of AIDS, who were no longer really able to take care of themselves, and their friends or sisters took them in, and this was a special relationship with these two brother and a sister whom I knew very well in those 10 years I worked in AIDS. So it's a persona poem in the voice of the brother who is dying of AIDS, and it's called Caregiver. And the biblical scriptural verse underneath it is from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 7. He has walled me in so I cannot escape. He has weighed me down with chains. Hours waiting for tests at the hospital with my sister have stopped. No more treatment to endure up the nose, down the throat with full-blown AIDS peaking like the narcissus I forced last January. Smoothing out the bedspread, she tries her best to switch the mood. Something will come along. I miss the days of protests at ACT UP demonstrations in Harvard Square. Instead, I'm left flat on my back, my bones no longer padded. Much of the time, I just listen to sounds of distant street noise, her coming and going. Throughout the day, we speak through the shorthand of gestures, a nod, a wave, a wink, much as we did as teenagers when we hid secrets from our parents. I pretend to be brave after all, attempt to play the role of staying alive, yet counting off all I've lost. I cannot sleep off this fear. I try to hide it from her, use my eyes, my smile, but my expressions misfire. Underneath our evening chit-chat, the pulsing thing that is true, I will not outlast it this time. Only now am I ready to let go of her hand. This next poem is a poem of regret, and also reconciliation. It's a knitting pattern. It's entitled, it's kind of a weird title. It's knit 5 and then purl 10, knit 10, repeat the last 5 stitches, knit 5. So it's a knitting pattern for a baby blanket. Your voice unspools inside me, knitting on the porch while bats crisscross the yard. The blow up that morning at Dad's funeral is as burnished as a scar on that old elm tree we used to play, kick the can under. I'm halfway through a blanket for a friend's baby, using Lopi wool skeins hunted down in Iceland last winter. I thought we had reached a truce in that old family quarrel, yet my fingers will not allow me to rest, the wooden needles ticking knit 10, purl 10 into a basket weave design. Just now I've lost count of the rows and notice I dropped a stitch, a hole at the top. I won't deny how hurt blossoms over the years, but you have developed a kind of affection for your airtight anger. Tonight, I'll spend time unpicking, unraveling yarn, row by row, to get back to where the pattern went wrong, pulling apart the tangled knots. And we have 2 more poems left, so hang in there. This is a love poem to John, my partner. It happens late at night, when you are always thinking about your relationships. But it's also about, and a lot of the book is about this, where the connections don't happen with words. There's always a lot of misfiring with the words, but the connections happen through our senses, our body, and ultimately, in this poem, through the physical world. It's called Middlefield. Middlefield is a location in the Berkshires of where our cabin is. And David Quirk, I see, is on here, so he knows where it is because he's one of our wonderful neighbors. So it's called Middlefield, July 14th, 2012. Late at night, as we sleep into one another on this sagging bed, the mattress sloping us to your side, I think of our years together, the room still as though it were holding its breath for the next sentence, soft-spoken. I hear in the night what the house has to say, listen to our conversations in disrepair. Only tonight, after brushing the Scrabble letters into the cardboard box at the end of the game, have I shuffled each strained foreword of our exchanges in the kitchen. Despite the hour, I want to rouse you, whisper to you about the way the dark holds on, how the rhythmic croaking vibrates out in the meadow. A cool draft separates the curtains, lifting up enough for me to show you a heavy moon taped up in the sky. The crisp scent of spearmint seeps in from the window cracked open, the sweep of the raw wind sifting the leaves. By your side, I lie there finding a voice, call out in a language more actual than speech. For once, I admit words fail me, shrivel away in my mouth. Let me draw you out of bed into the mountain air, our eyes making out the steady pulse of a firefly under this starless night on the other side of words. And the last poem is the second last poem of the collection, and the poem, it's where the title of the book, Where It Will, comes from. It comes from this poem. It's called Lines on Autumn Day. My level gaze out the window keeps an eye on chickadees perched together, feather to feather, at the feeders hung in early October. I recognize in their pecking at the suet, in their darting back and forth to nests in the pines, my own grasping and letting go. By midday, the temperature is falling, light crosses from east to west earlier in the afternoon over the empty trees. First, I must thin out my own regrets, to tie the frayed rope ends of holding on and releasing. Maple trees that line the yard drop the last of their blood-dipped leaves. Today, I swear to let everything settle where it will, wherever that is. Thank you so much.
Wow. I don't think there's very many dry eyes around here. That was such a moving, beautiful reading. So if you haven't got your copy yet, just I'm going to drop a link in here. Go ahead and order it. But you definitely want to get Where It Will by Tony. And I'm going to open it up to y'all. If y'all have questions that you want to ask about any of the poems or just share, then please feel free to hop in. You can unmute yourself. I see that Amanda says, thank you, Tony, for sharing these words with us. They are beautiful, moving. This collection is a reflection of where you've been. Do you write in poems, your diary, or otherwise about your wishes, what you dream of, or want the future?
That's an interesting question. John knows this. I keep a dream journal next to my bed, and I'm often telling John dreams when I wake up. And then I usually write them down. So I don't think that I write those dreams in my other notebooks, because my notebooks are really ideas, images, or phrases that come to me when wanting to write a poem. But I definitely incorporate a lot of those dreams into the poems. For example, the Sunday phone call, which is about my dad, that was a dream of my dad, coming into the dream and sparring with me. So it does influence. I would definitely say it influences the writing of the poems, but it's really never directly into the notebooks. That's into a dream notebook that I have. It's a great question. Interesting.
Anybody else? That was a question. more on your process. You mentioned reading Amy Bloom early on. Did you find others help to stir you, bring forth this gift?
So most people wouldn't think of this of me, but I am actually an introvert. I think John's the only person who really knows that. And so I'm not someone who really shares poems very much with people. And I also I write very slowly in many ways, but I write a lot in my notebooks. Um, I would also I would also say that my process is I've gone through very long periods of dry spells of writing, but I read really extensively during those periods, and I'm taking lots of notes in my notebooks of ideas or phrases or images that I want to include in new poems. But my process, I wish I could be that writer who like writes every day and is really disciplined. It's just not who I am. It's also because I had kind of a big job where I wasn't really able to have that kind of a discipline. And so that's kind of my process. I would say my process is mostly through my notebooks. And I read extensively, mostly memoir and poetry and nonfiction. I don't read a lot of fiction, but that's a nice question, actually.
Okay, Yolanda says, have you ever experimented with prose, short stories, etc.? What led you to poetry as a chosen medium?
It's a wonderful questions from my niece, Yolanda, who there is a poem. If you read the book, one of the poems is dedicated to her. It just says to my niece, but it's called Last Will and Testament for a Niece. It's actually for her. But I've never written in other media. I've only written in poetry, and partly it's because I was always drawn to poetry as a very young boy when I was growing up, and I've read poetry since I was like 13 years old. So for me, it was the only, for me, poetry is a mystery. These poems are always mystery to me, and that's when I talk about at the beginning, that process of that poetry was always private to me, was always a private exercise for me. It was a form of therapy. So I think it's been easier to use my creative life and focus it on writing poetry rather than fiction or nonfiction. Yeah, it's a nice question. Thank you.
Who?
Oh, do I have?
Yeah,
Oh, I love this one.
yeah.
I have lots of favorite poets. I hear my partner laughing in the background. And there are poets like Jane Kenyon, who's from New Hampshire, whom I adore. And I think in many ways I started writing after reading her. There are two foreign poets who have really, really shaped my poetry. A Russian poet named Anna Akhmatova, who wrote during Stalin, and she was silenced by Stalin. Beautiful, beautiful poetry. And then a gay poet who really influenced me was Cavafy. He was a Greek poet. I loved him. There's a great confessional poet whom I love, Sharon Olds. I recommend one of her books called Stag Leap. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It blew me away. If you ever have a chance to read it, it's absolutely stunning. And then there's a wonderful different kind of poet that is influenced a lot of my nature poems in this book, called Mark Strand, who was an American poet. Those are some of the poets who just come to mind right now, whom I always go back to. I'm looking at some of these questions. That's great. Your poems are just good. Yes, I'm going to just answer Jackie's question. Throughout this collection, I think of it as very spiritual. It is, there are lots of religious reference, a lot of scriptural reference. I think of a lot of the poems use even persona biblical characters. There's one called Lot's Confession, where I reimagine Lot. So I definitely think that my divinity school background shaped this book in many, many ways. I think my divinity school friends like Elisa and Jackie will see that very, very prominently in the poems and in the text. Yeah. I want to be conscious of time because I know everyone has a lot of places to go. But I just kind of wanted to conclude, if we have just 1 minute. I really want to thank everyone for coming. I know this is during the middle of the day. Some people are on the West Coast, like Jackie, and and John's family, Valerie and Rick Williams. And so I know that it took time and effort to get here, and I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to also say that most of these poems I never ever shared with my family, so this was the first time that they are hearing them, and that's, I think, why they are sharing the poignancy of them. But thank you. I wanted to thank everyone, and thank you, Karen, for this opportunity. This has been a really, really, really wonderful opportunity. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, all thanks to you for trusting us to bring your words out into the world. I mean, it is very personal poetry, and I know that
Mhm.
it's not something that you take lightly when you enter into an endeavor like this. And we tried to honor that and, respect the work that you did, and just really just shine a light on you and your work. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, guys,
Bye-bye.
thank you for joining us. Look up Susan K. Anderson, find her book,
Yes, big shout out to Susan K.
and check out, grab your own copy of Mezzanine. And if you haven't got it, For It Will by Anthony. So thank you so much, Tony. And thank you everyone for coming today. And if you want to watch it again later and hear Tony read some of his poems again, just check out our YouTube channel, Gnashing Teeth Publishing, and it'll be up later today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.